Welcome, viewers. We are at the cusp of yet another significant event in the country. It's our 75th year of independence. As our first Prime Minister, Mr. Nehru, said, India gaining independence was truly a tryst with destiny. We have witnessed many selfless sacrifices, and I'm sure it reminds every Indian about the dawn of a new beginning, the beginning of an era of deliverance. Let me introduce myself quickly. I'm Mahesh and I head the strategy and digital solutions at Pierian. I'm a proud 15-year-old Pierianite. At Pierian, in our core, we have always been very proud of our legacy of being an Indian company that really went global. Our culture is very intrinsic in our organization. This year is very special for all of us, and we plan to commemorate this year by presenting a series of podcasts on curated subjects and domains. We have embarked on a journey to bring you some of the most eminent personalities in various streams who are leading the change in the country and leverage their wisdom and experience on these topics. Today, I'm honored to present you our podcast series, India, the Next 75 Years. A first topic of education in a country like ours, with a history of about 55,000 plus years, where formal education structures have existed in the country, and how these 5,000 years is going to influence the next 75 years of our country in terms of education, is going to be the podcast that we're going to talk about today. This will be a 4 series podcast, considering that it's a 5,000-year legacy that we are talking about. On this fine August day, I am accompanied by an accomplished and august guest. He is a 4th-generation Army veteran and served in the Indian Army for 39 years. His experience as an educator spans another glorious 16 years. An exceptional speaker, mentor, he's spoken in numerous national and international events on the topic of education. He is honored with the coveted Vishisht Seva Medal by the President of India. He has recently authored a book entitled Envisioning Indian Higher Education, where he has shared his comprehensive view on the roadmap into the future of education. Please welcome our guest, Dr. Brigadier R.S. Grewal, to our podcast on education and its role in the next 75 years. To initiate this conversation with Brigadier Grewal, I welcome my very affable colleague, Abhishek Gupta, heads our assurance advisory business. Without much further ado, Abhishek, over to you. Welcome, Dr. Grewal and Abhishek.
Thank you very much, Mahesh, and thank you very much, Dr. Brigadier Grewal. I think we are honored, and it is our privilege at Pierian to kind of have you on board with us to kind of talk on such an important and such a critical topic like education. I think it's quite inspiring to kind of really see your enriching journey of 55 glorious years, and I'm sure that it'll be an honor for us to kind of read more about your journey and to really understand that how you have transitioned yourself from army to education after serving army for almost 39 plus years, and considering that you came from an overall army background, being a 4th-generation army officer. So it'll be great, sir, for us to kind of really get to kind of know more about you and your insights about education.
Thank you. The most important point that how did I transition from the army to the education sector? It is not that challenging. I joined the National Defense Academy in 1963 and retired from the army in 2002. During this period, I was teaching in various army training establishments like Defense Services Staff College, Wellington, as well as College of Military Engineering, Pune, for almost 10 years. So teaching and learning is part of our DNA. Why this question comes up is that transitioning from army to the education sector could be a challenge is basically because not much is known in the civil street about the army. For example, not very many people are aware that education is given a lot of importance in the army. Indian Army runs the country's most successful and one of the largest adult education programs in the country. We get our men to various training establishments, or even when they are in their units, we pay a lot of attention to their continuing education. Self-learning and lifelong learning is part of our DNA. Indian universities during the last 15 years has started paying a lot of attention to outcome-based education. Whereas in the Indian Army, we have practiced this concept since early 1960s. Whenever an officer or a Jawan goes for training or he goes to attend a particular training module, the duration of the module may vary depending upon its content. It could be 3 months, it could be 1 year, it could be 2 years. On day one, we tell him that once he finishes that module, what he will know and what he will be able to do. So therefore, this outcome-based education has been practiced by the Indian Army for a very, very long time now. And even the pedagogy that we use in our training establishments is based on Bloom's taxonomy, which lays down the hierarchy of learning, where at the bottom of the pyramid is remembering, then is comprehending, then applying the knowledge which you have gained, thereafter analyzing, evaluating, and creating, which ensures that the students get full benefit from the training being imparted to them. In addition to that, there are a large number of other aspects which our universities follow or are trying to follow, which are adopted by the Indian Army, like the concept of flipped classrooms. We have been following that since ages. The teacher gives an assignment to the students and the students study on their own, and next day in the class, the discussion is held. So as far as officers are concerned, they move from their command or field assignments to staff assignments and then to teaching assignments. And in the Army, we ensure that the best talent into the teaching side. We feel that a teacher will shape the future generations. And that is why a teacher is kept at a very high pedestal. Due regards are given to him. And it is something which we have borrowed from our ancient traditions, where the kings used to rise from their thrones to welcome a teacher. So having come from this background, to transition to the education sector was not a major challenge for me. It was just another posting, I will call it.
Wonderful, sir. I think the way you have really simplified the understanding, and at least I was absolutely not aware that how much depth Indian Army kind of carries for education. And it appears that it was absolutely a seamless transition for you, sir. Well, now I would like to kind of pick up your thoughts on a very interesting topic, probably taking back into a little legacy. Our education system has got a kind of a glorious legacy of more than 5,000 years old. On this note, I would really like to kind of understand from you that how our education system has evolved over different millennia, over different decades and centuries. And how do you think that we can kind of really bring some historical perspective behind our education system, sir?
Yes, you are very right. We in India have a very rich heritage as far as education is concerned. It starts with the Vedic era, which it is believed that the Vedic era the start of the Vedic era was somewhere around 2500 BC. And our rishis, they meditated and thereafter they composed the Veds. And these Veds were composed somewhere around 1500 BC. And after that, during that period, once they had acquired that knowledge, then obviously it was something natural that the society should gain from their knowledge. So a system of gurukuls came about as far as education of children was concerned. We started off with the Guru Shishya Parampara. There was an Upnayana ceremony. And based on that, a student, when he went through that ceremony, he moved to the Gurukul and he became a Shish of the Guru. And he rather stayed in the Gurukul as part of the Guru's family. The teaching learning also was carried out. That process was very, very scientific. The student was given the basic knowledge. Thereafter, it was in a very interesting way that he was given a question. He was asked to explore about that question and find out more information. Thereafter, discussions took place either with the senior students or with the guru, and the student tried to learn from those aspects of it. In addition, experiential learning also was stressed upon, and therefore it was a very, very scientific system of education which was there. An interesting part is that during this era, the education was one-to-one, one guru teaching one student at a particular time. And the gurukuls were autonomous. They were supported by the kings of that era. They were supported by the community, but no one interfered in the internal working or functioning of the gurukul. After the student had finished the studies at the gurukul, that was at the age of about 18 years or so, then he moved on for higher education. And for that, there was a selection process. Not everyone moved to the higher education field. And admission to higher education was totally based on merit. There was no discrimination based on caste, creed, or any other factor, or even the economic status. There are instances where princes from royal families were denied admission to pursue higher education. Now, this higher education was provided in organizations which were known as agraharas, rishis. Different rishis established different agraharas, and people went there for higher education. Interestingly, even women were given the opportunity to pursue education. And number of these women rose to the status of rishis. Gargi is one name which comes to my mind. That is what we call, the era where, where Brahmavadinis, these women who went to the agraharas to study and acquire higher education, they were called Brahmavadinis. And that was the era when education was literally flourishing in India, and Takshila University came up somewhere around 700 BC. Again, these agraharas were also very autonomous. Number of kings gave them land grants, they gave them financial assistance, but nobody ever interfered in the functioning of the agraharas. So it was a very, very scientifically designed system where the community, the ruling elite, and the gurus functioned in a very, very integrated manner for the benefit of the society.
It is indeed very heartening and a great learning for us, Brigadier, that how our education system flourished so very well in the Vedic era. But I'm really kind of keen to understand that what really happened after the Vedic era, which really kind of halted that entire growth or probably kind of pushed back our education system to an extent.
You are very right that the Vedic era was the golden era of higher education in India. But somewhere around about 1000 BC, which we call the later Vedic era, Manu's Smriti came in, and that was in 500 BC. Now, during that period, the education or even the other aspects of the society got dominated by rituals. And the caste system came in. The higher castes were only entitled to education. The lower castes were deprived of that opportunity. Even so much so that even the women were debarred from education. There were other historical reasons because Alexander invaded India in 326 BC, and after he left, some Greeks, they stayed back in India, and the Indian society did not want the women to be exposed to the Greek culture, and that's why the women were, not allowed to go outside the households, and because of that, they even got debarred from receiving higher education. Now, when all this thing was happening, the Buddhist and the Jain systems of education came in, and they thereafter carried the torch forward. Interestingly, the Buddhist system of education also initially did not allow the women to join their viharas, but after some time, one of the disciples of Gautam Buddha prevailed upon him, and therefore separate viharas were created for education of women. It happens in every society. Anything that goes up comes down. The Vedic system of education perhaps saw a downfall, but it was the Buddhist and the Jain system then took over and started flourishing thereafter.
Well, it sounds so inspiring that the women who are given the importance when it comes to the education in the Vedic era, but slowly and gradually, the way you are explaining, sir, how it kind of diminishes that opportunity diminishes for a woman in the society about education. Well, with this thought, Brigadier, I want to kind of get your insights a little more in terms of how the ancient universities were built up, how they were grown up in our historical part of India.
Yeah, a very interesting question. The Buddhist and the Jain system of education, when they came up, they changed the paradigm. Initially, in the Gurukuls, it was one-to-one education, whereas in the Buddhist viharas as well as Jainalayas, they changed the system of one teacher teaching group of students. A classroom system emerged in the Indian scene, and but the whole thing was very, very inclusive. The Buddhist viharas, the Jainalayas, they taught based on their respective scriptures or their literature, that is the Buddhist literature or the Jain literature, but they also ensured that the study of Veds also continued. That was done so that the students imbibe and they carry out a comparative study of logic and philosophy of the Vedas. And therefore, it was a very, very interesting system, inclusive system, where all the students learnt not only about their own scriptures but also about the Veds. Again, in the Jain viharas as well as Jainalayas as well as Buddhist viharas, there was no discrimination. Women were allowed to join these institutions, and there were separate classes held for them. And interestingly, in the Jain system, they had women known as Ajis and Kantis, who went around from place to place teaching students. They went to a village. In the evening, they would go to classes and impart education. But somewhere around 400 AD onwards, the Buddhist viharas, they had grown in their statures, and also the quality of education being provided was so good that they grew into universities. And the first one to come up was the Nalanda University, somewhere around about 400 AD. And after that, number of such universities came up, like Odantapuri, Somapura, Vallabhi. These universities came up, and most of these universities were in the area of present-day Bihar or east of it. Some even went into the area of Bengal, except Vallabhi, which was in Gujarat. They acquired international fame. A lot of students came from abroad, from different countries, to study in these universities. And again, admission was based on merit. Since Veds were taught, also it was a compulsory subject there. Study of Sanskrit or prior knowledge of Sanskrit was also a must. Now, during this period, the Vedic system of education also got revived, and number of temple schools came up, especially in the south. Important ones are like Kanchipuram or Thiruvatiur near Chennai. But unfortunately, due to invasions from the northwest, the invaders destroyed these universities, and somewhere around 1197, the last of these universities was destroyed.
Sir, well, I wish I can keep on hearing you and I just have taken a back into history. I was kind of feeling that I am into like a couple of centuries back. But How do you feel that when the Britishers came to India, they have really brought some changes to the entire reforms about the education system in India, and whether those reforms were helpful for India as a country to make ourselves as an English speaking population, which in a way is also helping us so when we kind of go global.
Yes, you're very right. But I think before we talk about the British, we need to go one step back. Now, once the Indian universities were, ancient Indian universities were destroyed, that is the time the Mughals came into they established their empire in India. 1526 was the time when Babur set up the Mughal empire in India. And they laid a lot of stress on education, but it was confined to school level education, which was imparted through madrasas. Yes, they established some colleges, but not too many. One college was there in Agra, but not too many. Most of the education was this thing through madrasas, where the emphasis was on making people literate and also giving them some knowledge about accountancy. Uh, the madrasas also relied on two different systems of education. One was called makulat and other one was mankulat. Makulat relied on rationality and logic, whereas mankulat was based on beliefs, based on myths. Unfortunately, what happened was that during the later part of the Mughal period, the mankulat system became ascendant, and with the result, the quality of education which was being provided in the madrasas deteriorated. However, the Mughals paid a lot of attention to vocational education. And you find that a lot of craftsmen came up, like, in construction industry and even textiles, etc., of the Mughal era, they were good. When all this happened, interestingly, simultaneously, the Vedic system of education or the temple schools, they continued in India. Some were, yes, destroyed, but majority, temple schools and the madrasas existed side by side. When the British arrived in India in the 18th century, interestingly, the number of Indians who were literate, who could read, write, and who had knowledge of school level type of education, and who could do basic accounting, that was the proportion of such uh, people in India was much higher than that which was existing in Europe at that time. However, the British wanted the people to serve their interests, the colonial interests, and they tried to change the system, and that is how a controversy, that is Orientalist versus Anglicist controversy, came in, and Macaulay, that famous or infamous minute of Macaulay of 1835, that won the day, and the Anglicist system of education was imposed in India. And with the result, that destroyed the school level education in India. And by about 1882, even the British felt that there was a need for adult education to be adopted in India, because they had destroyed, and there were a large number of adults roaming around without being literate. Thereafter, what happened? In 1857, the British, they established three universities, one at Calcutta, another at Madras, then at Bombay. Slowly, they established some more universities. But the role basically assigned to these universities was for conducting examinations for various schools and colleges. They were not teaching universities. Slowly, this aspect of teaching, this role of teaching was also given to the universities. And somewhere around 1882, again, they realized that the standard of Indian universities was not at par with those universities which were there in Britain. So therefore, what they did was in 1882, the first Indian Education Commission was established. They gave certain recommendations, but nothing came out of it. In 1902, they again established another commission. Again, nothing came out of it. So somewhere in 1938, they again convened another commission, which was known as Sargent Commission. And that gave its report in 1944. It took 6 years because the World War II broke out in 1939. And Sargent Commission came up with a number of meaningful suggestions. But they also stated that 40 years, it will take 40 years for these reforms to be actually implemented. Now, that aspect was not acceptable to Indian leaders. They said 1984 is too far for those things. And so, therefore, what happened was that the Indian education system did not produce people who were knowledgeable. It produced people who could speak English, who were literate, I will call it, but not knowledgeable. So that is how I will say that the British system gave us an English-speaking population, but not a population which was knowledgeable, which could contribute to the development of the society as such.
Wonderful, sir. I think I am thoroughly enjoying the kind of taking all the insights and learnings from you. Well, considering the limited time we have in our hand, it takes me to the last question, or probably the last thought which we want to kind of take it from you. We all understand that educational system is something which kind of lays down the foundation for the overall success of the country across the globe. And taking a cue from the rich heritage of our Indian educational system, how do you really think that we need to now further nurture our current education system so that at least we become more competitive in the world when it comes to education comparison to the leading nations across the globe?
You raised a very pertinent question. You raised, for any country to flourish, there are two aspects, sectors which they must look after. One is healthcare, second one is education. And there is a strong linkage between education and civilization. It has been historically proved that a good system of education produces people or provides sound national character to the citizens of that country. And education is an elixir which helps in the development of the country. The type of education that we provide should be meaningful, where the students should go to higher education institutions or even schools. They should go to learn, not to acquire degrees. The education should be such which inculcates that, brings in that intellectual honesty in the students, makes them aware of the ethical way of living, and instills a civic sense into them, and instills human values. They should be sensitive to the views or the feelings of others, and they should be able to live in a society in harmony. Until unless we take care to have this system of education or this model of education, we will not succeed. Now, in India, our biggest challenge is that most of the students join universities or colleges basically to acquire degrees and get jobs. Acquisition of knowledge is not their concern. With the result, the quality of education being provided in our universities is not up to the mark, and we are lagging behind. So we have to change the paradigm and where the importance is given to acquisition of knowledge and not obtaining degrees and trying to get jobs.
Well, very, very, very deep last kind of thoughts from you, Brigadier. The two words which comes to my mind after talking to you for almost 20 plus minutes are I'm feeling more inspired. and learn it. And as we leave this conversation, I'm feeling more proud to be an Indian and be part of such a country which has got such an enriched legacy behind it when it comes to education. And I'm sure that the thought with which you are leaving us, I think it's going to be a kind of a thought which we will build up in the next few episodes and kind of really see how the education system will also kind of look like in the next 25 to 50 odd years. With this, I would really like to kind of thank you, Brigadier, for your time, and I would like to kind of invite Mahesh for the vote of thanks for this wonderful session. So, thank you.
Thank you. I enjoyed interacting with you.
On behalf of Pierian, Abhishek, and I, thank you, Brigadier, for taking the time, sharing your knowledge with us. It was truly a very enlightening discussion, and I came to know quite a bit of stuff that, while I've been reading about education, I didn't know quite the amount of intrinsic knowledge that you're carrying with this. So thank you for your time. In the future conversations, we will talk about Indian education and the changing landscapes. And I'm sure all our listeners gained quite a bit of insights to this. Thank you for everyone who have tuned in, and keep watching this space for future episodes. Thank you so much. Have a good evening.